There's a lot more to be said about succession than I'm taking the time to cover here in these lectures, but just hopefully you're getting the highlights of the three models, the three different mechanisms of succession and how succession basically proceeds. And notice that another main point is that multiple methods in the same system may operate, okay? So we may have early inhibition going on, and then between crabgrass and horseweed, okay, and white aster, okay, and ragweed, and then maybe so for example, crabgrass and horseweed may be inhibiting white aster and ragweed, but if a physical disturbance comes in and allows these guys to take over, they actually facilitate the environment for broom sedge. Okay, so we've got both inhibition and facilitation happening here. Okay, and then there may be other mechanisms, whether they're facilitation or inhibition. And in these later stages of succession, we see that tolerance may be the case by the time we get to these climax communities, so that these older trees, loblolly pines, white oaks, may be more likely to tolerate the arrival of understory plants or other kinds of plants that may come into the community. So again, the bottom line here is that there may be multiple methods that are operating during the same particular successional system. And this is showing the abandonment of a tobacco field. So abandoned farm fields that then allow to people just ignore them and just kind of growth just takes place have often been studied as ways of looking at secondary succession. This is an example of secondary succession. So I hope you get the idea that one of the points that I'm trying to make is that community succession is often not really that predictable as to which particular species are going to occur in which predictable order. And that within a community you may start with, say, a species A, and then if species B can then colonize, species B may facilitate the arrival for species D. But if, for example, species C comes in instead of B because A provides a suitable environment for either B or C, and it's kind of random as to which seeds are going to blow in, right? How does dispersal take place? Whether animals are carrying seeds on their back, whether the wind's bringing them in. So as this random component of seed dispersal may take place, if C happens to arrive instead of B, we may never see D within that community because C doesn't allow the arrival of D. So notice that this earlier process that took place as to the arrival of either B or C will determine what's going to happen later. And all of this contributes to the overall somewhat unpredictability of community succession. Now, I'm not trying to say that it's just completely unpredictable and you can never know what's going to happen, because all of those other mechanisms that we just talked about in terms of how community succession takes place certainly do still hold true. A final point that I want to make, and I'm not going to go into that much detail because I do want to still kind of keep this relatively short, is that understanding the principles of succession is critical to a really important field called restoration ecology. As you know, and as we've talked about, many habitats have been destroyed for a variety of reasons due to human influences. And for example, here you can see that cows have really overgrazed this area in Blue Water Creek in northern New Mexico. And that over time, this community was restored, not randomly, not just by letting it be abandoned, but by providing suitable conditions to allow certain species to come in. And having an understanding of which species may allow the arrival of the next species and which those would allow the arrival for the following species can help restoration ecologists decide how to treat the soil, right? Or what to seed these areas with, so having some of the interventions in here that work in concert with natural processes to allow the re-succession and re-restoration of habitats is the basic focus of restoration ecology. These are just three other examples of trying to restore habitats or attempting to restore habitats. A lot of the restoration of native prairie lands, as you may be familiar with, most of the Midwest and western part of the United States was almost completely converted into agricultural land in order to grow corn and wheat. And that required the removal of almost all of the native or natural prairies that used to exist within the U.S. And restoring some of these agricultural lands, especially some of the land that was abandoned anyway, to try to get them to go back to native prairies and have the right constitution combination of prairie grasses so that they somewhat resemble what the prairies were like in the past has been remarkably successful for many of these projects. And this talks about the University of Wisconsin being pioneers in this practice of restoration, of prairie restoration. In other cases, places are degraded so badly that complete restoration may not be possible, but at least there's some what we call rehabilitation. So that is to allow some other community to take place, even if it's not the community that was originally found in this area. At least the area can be recolonized by certain kinds of species, maybe exotic species that will allow the soil to be stabilized and can at least maintain a semi-natural environment here, because the complete restoration back to the original is not possible for a variety of reasons. Again, we're skipping over a lot. And finally, open pit mines in England have been replaced entirely by a different kind of ecosystem. So it may be that this was originally a wooded area, a big forest that was then just completely destroyed, bulldozed, dug out in order to mine for certain minerals there. And so these became these open pits. And so trying to restore that back to woodland was probably just completely unfeasible. So instead of just leaving horrible open pits there, what they did was to fill them in with water and convert them into small ponds and other kinds of freshwater habitats. And these could be stocked with fishes and other kinds of invertebrates, and the vegetation along the shores allowed to grow up. Often this is done in concert with allowing hiking trails and trying to replace these areas with some kind of a natural, I'm using the word natural, some kind of a biological ecosystem as opposed to a big hole in the ground that can be enjoyed by people. So we see this combination of being able to completely restore a habitat or rehabilitate a habitat to a certain extent, or completely replace the habitat. And all of these are areas for restoration ecology. So that kind of ends this lecture on community ecology. I know I went through it kind of quickly, even though it may seem like a long time when you're listening to this. And we are going to pick up with ecosystem ecology in class.